Hi there, my name is Philip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And in today's episode, I'm going to share with you a session from our recent Categorypalooza 2022 digital event. If you joined us, you helped make it our most successful event ever, with over 700 attendees on the day and who have watched the sessions again on demand. If you didn't join us on the day, all of the sessions are still available by going to artofprocurement.com/Categorypalooza 2022. That's all one word, but you'll also find that on the show notes for today's episode, artofprocurement.com/podcast. Because of the importance of market intelligence to procurement's work, we kicked off Categorypalooza by talking about how it can be used to generate insight that offers actionable value to the business. And so in this session, I spoke with ProcurementIQ's Embry Davis and Ben Kempenich about how all of us can be prepared for the uncertainty and disruptions to come. Now, we covered such topics as how to know which data is the most reliable, how the speed of business is impacting the shelf life of market intelligence, and which stakeholders and suppliers procurement should turn to as potential sources of category insights. I started by asking Embry if he sees a difference in how organizations use market intelligence based on where they are from a procurement maturity perspective.
Absolutely. And that's a great question. You know, when you look at a lot of those more tactical organizations, they may only be looking at a few things, such as, price, and the final price that they're paying from their supplier versus, these more strategic organizations. I like to use an analogy of want to see the full picture, want to see not only what am I paying for something, but why am I paying that?
Yeah.
What is making up that cost? What is driving that price? Outside of the supplier that I'm working with, what does that entire supply landscape look like? And those are some of the things that not only market intelligence but supplier intelligence can answer.
Yeah, a lot of those cost drivers, we'll probably come back to that later in the session, that it's one of the kind of greatest tools that we have at our disposal to understand, for example, when you get a cost increase request is this justified or not? Well, what are my input costs and how are my input costs changing? Is the supplier really trying to, use this as an opportunity to get a big cost increase? Or is it genuine? And, how the insights that you have behind that will obviously drive how you respond.
Absolutely.
Ben, I know you've been waiting patiently for me to bring you into the conversations, and you're one of the senior analysts at ProcurementIQ. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what actually interests you about market intelligence so people can get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, so kind of parroting Embry's answer a little bit, market intelligence doesn't necessarily change a lot unto itself, but in our business, change is the only constant. So the sorts of questions that clients are approaching us with are constantly changing, but also the tools that best serve them, or even the tools that we are using to best serve them, are constantly changing. We're always trying to develop new products that we can serve to them, and the methods that we need to come up with to kind of fill in the content of those products is something that I'm constantly thinking about on a day-to-day basis. So what information are we giving them? How are we structuring that information internally to make it an efficient process to get it over to them, that kind of thing. And that stuff all sort of titillates the nerdy side of my personality. So it's all very interesting to me.
I want to dig into that a little bit, because you talked about different sources of information. When you're doing research, you're going to a lot of different places. But it's not just about, okay, I've got 5 different sources. I'm going to pull some data from 5 different sources, bring them into something central, and, away you go. One of the biggest challenges I think that we all have when we're looking for market insights is really understanding what's true data, what's reliable data. What can we trust? What are we going to put in front of a supplier or put in front of a senior executive? And they will actually see that and have faith and trust in the information we put in front of them. So I'd love to know kind of the approach that you use to actually determine, what is the source of truth for this data point that I'm looking for.
The answer can be a little bit different depending on whether talking about our core reports or our custom research module, which is sort of a growing part of our business, but I've had my hand in both. For the core report, some of your listeners may not realize that we are an offshoot of a larger, older company by the name of Ibis World. And a lot of the information that we put into our reports is in a sense inherited from them. They're kind of our parent, and you want to trust what your parent is giving you. But thankfully, much like us, a lot of what they are using are from government sources. So things like the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, Census Bureau, the Federal Reserve Economic Data, SEC EDGAR for company financials, the International Trade Commission for import data. So ideally, you want to be able to trust where that information is coming from, but sometimes you have to go beyond that as well. Have you ever heard, Phil, of the CRAP test?
I haven't, but I would love to know about it.
It's it's not just asking is this source crap or not. It's a little more involved than that. It's a framework developed by librarians in the California State University, Chico, here on the Best Coast. But CRAP stands for CRAAP. It's an acronym: currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, purpose. So currency is sort of the timeliness of the information. And when you're talking about government sources, that's usually the most interesting aspect to me. When was this released? Is it the last census 10 years ago? Or is it a monthly data source? Relevance obviously is, does it relate to the topic I'm trying to answer? Who is the originally intended audience? The authority is who's giving it, the government obviously, but other sources you want to be asking, what are the credentials or organizational affiliations of that source? Accuracy, is there evidence? Has it been peer reviewed? And then purpose kind of gets into things like, is this propaganda from a government specifically? If it's not if it's other countries, they might be trying to use the information to present themselves favorably. Is it fact or opinion? Is it impartial? Is it biased or not? And these are all questions you can ask yourself to try to dig a little bit deeper into the quality of a source.
Are there red flags, of things that you see and what, I'm going to avoid that?
Sometimes you can just tell just from looking at a source, the overall quality of the website that it's coming from. Are they citing sources or not? Are those sources citing other sources? Is there just a chain of sources being cited? And it's very hard to find the actual root of the information, the source of truth, so to speak. So yeah, there's always some red flags, and I think you just sort of start to develop an innate sense of how to spot them.
And Embry, what do you see? Like, you obviously again talk to clients all the time. When they're looking for, what points of information do you find that that the procurement people are typically looking for? Like, what's the most important, whether it's data sources or actually output data that they're looking for?
Yeah, great question, Phil. I think the most important piece of information clients are looking for is oftentimes going to be looking at the input cost drivers. I think input costs, understanding price drivers overall, what is actually driving the price of what we're paying. I think clients, I've been hearing a lot lately of wanting to stay up to date on recent developments and innovation. Is what we're buying, is what we're procuring going to be obsolete in the next 5 years? Is there going to be another piece of technology? Is there going to be another service or even another player that's potentially entering this industry that's really going to take over what we're doing and, essentially make this function, this service, outdated and irrelevant within the next few years? And if so, does it make sense to put all of our efforts or put this time into this project? Does it make sense to lock in a longer term agreement, or should we just look at a short term fix and, let's just say, be more futuristic?
Yeah. Now, Ben, you talked about relevance of data, and Embry, you mentioned about the timing, and that folks are not wanting to look at old data. Is there a particular approach you take to determining whether data is out of date or not? Does it depend on the type of information, or is that changing because now everything is changing so quickly? It actually means that information and intelligence has a shorter shelf life.
Our core reports report most data on an annual basis, which sort of allows us to relax a little bit in a sense and not be as concerned about the day-to-day vagaries of what's happening in the world, but it is a crazy world and stuff is happening quite frequently. A lot of it is driven by the client, how frequently they need the information updated. So our reports are a year, but a lot of our custom reports, people are coming at us asking questions. What is this doing on a month-to-month basis? What is it going to be doing in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months into the future, trying to forecast therein? And commodities, I think, have been a very big part of that overall, just because of supply chain issues, inflation. Prices have gone crazy across the board, and we're seeing a lot more questions about what is this or what are these commodities doing as they apply to my supply chain, and where do we think those are going to head?
I do want to encourage anybody to ask questions. Embry, were you going to jump in on that? I don't want to.
Yeah, actually,
please do.
Thank you. And something just came to mind again. As far as what clients are coming to us, and what I'm hearing a lot in conversations is risk. And previously, I'll say maybe about 3-4 years ago when I first started, or even 5 years ago when I first started, risk was more so alongside the supplier's financial health overall, which is a component of risk. But again, given what's been going on in Ukraine, chip shortage, etc., the most important risk I'm hearing, and the most common risk, is supply chain risk, looking at upstream and downstream suppliers, the delivery of the products, customers potentially going out of business, key customers, which can have a huge impact on a core supplier. And even again, the chip shortage, and not just buying chips directly, but that being a major input cost in the majority of the things that we're buying as companies. So I'm noticing a lot of organizations and clients I work with, they still, like you mentioned, want to get that full picture, not just of the end product but what's making up that product and the potential delays and effects of that upstream and downstream supply chain.
The risk management is such a. I recall earlier in my career, I did a piece on third-party risk management and implemented a third-party risk management program. And at the time, the impression was that risk meant financial health, and that was it. And actually, if you look at financial regulations and all the different risk factors that federally regulated organizations have to follow, there's a long laundry list of all kinds of different risk factors that go from the supply assurance to geopolitical, financial health, as you said, reputational, lots more. And so I think that more organizations are starting to see that they have to be aware about those risks and not just financial health, for sure. Now, there's a couple of questions that are coming in, and I do want to encourage anybody to ask questions, pop them in that question box, and we'll come to as many as we possibly can. Just a quick one, Ben, I'm going to ask for you. Do you think general news sources like newspapers, cable news, etc., are valid points of reference for corporate procurement decision-making?
I think, again, in this world, it depends a little bit on the news source in question. But yeah, generally, I think so. Again, assess where they're getting their sources, if they're citing their links to where they're getting the information, the bibliographies, that sort of thing. One of our analysts here has taken it upon himself to give a sort of daily news brief of interesting things that are happening in the world for the rest of us analysts. And so he is very keyed into what's happening in the world. I'm probably a little bit less so. I often skim the headlines that he's sending and click into the interesting ones. But I think part of that too is knowing where your internal resources are. If you are interested in a subject and need to learn more, just knowing who around you can answer a question better than you can. But yeah, absolutely, to answer the question directly, I do think that is a valuable resource.
And we had just a question from David on logistics. Will there be a recording of the session for us to reference in the future? Just for everybody, I didn't mention this right at the very beginning, but yes, all sessions are being recorded, and you'll be able to actually watch them. As soon as each session is over, you'll be able to go back and watch it. It's a pretty quick turnaround. Thanks for that question, David. Now, I wanted to talk about, how do we make sense of the information that we have in front of us? There's actually a really good question from Karen that I'll bring up on the screen here, but it kind of aligns with the question I wanted to ask. Karen says, how do you encourage better questions regarding market intelligence? More importantly, how to develop actionable insights that are then communicated out of procurement? And, this is along the lines of a question that I was going to ask around, how are we taking this information essentially not necessarily taking it at face value, but triangulating all the insights that we have at our disposal to then build conclusions and recommendations that we can share externally.
Yeah, I think I can start this answer off, and maybe Ben might be able to help me out. But I think is the first part is understanding the difference between data and analysis. We can easily and often look at a data point, but sometimes that data point can be useless if you don't necessarily know what it means or why it's happening. Or, for example, we can see a price trend. A price may be trending upwards, but how long is that price going to continue to trend upwards? What is actually driving that price to trend upwards? And how does that actually affect the business? A lot of clients that I work with, they may look at a data point of a recent price trend and see, hey, we see the price of pulp and paper or the price of, temporary labor or construction is going up by about 5%. But then that may lead to another question. Is it going to continue to rise? Is this a short-term spike that we're seeing? Does it make sense to lock in a longer-term arrangement with our supplier? Or does it make sense to negotiate a shorter term contract, right now, because this is just a temporary spike that we're seeing, based on another driver. So that this can affect, your strategy with, suppliers and, how you're engaging with your business overall. So, and I say all of that to say is, understanding, what that data point actually means to be able to, articulate, the reason behind that, to your stakeholders, to your business.
I think a lot about.
You wanted to join in, sorry to talk
Sure,
over you.
no worries. Yeah, I think a lot about market intelligence, but I don't necessarily think a lot about procurement. And so even a procurement professional can speak a very different vocabulary than I do, and then you compound that across 1,000 different markets or industries. So everybody's kind of having slightly different ways of referring to things. So when I'm talking to clients and trying to scope out a custom research project, say, it's a lot of questions. I don't know everything about every market that we research, and they often don't know much about the market necessarily that they are trying to look into and get research about. So it's just making sure, one, that everybody's on the same page in terms of what we're all talking about.
And something that Embry, you were talking about, in fact, in terms of data. Data at a point in time, and a real example right now is the chip market. So if you look at the chip market and pricing at this given time, you look back and say, well, price of chips have gone up exponentially because of supply issues. However, that doesn't mean that that's going to continue. If you look at the bigger picture now of lots of demand now coming on stream, with also softening of, so lots of demand, lots of capacity, coming on stream with softening demand, that actually means that the outlook over the next 6, 9, 12 months for chips may actually be a reduction in prices because supply potentially could end up outstripping demand. So, really important not to take one data point and look at that. And I know back earlier in my career, I was probably guilty of doing that, where you have a data point and you put it in front of a supplier in a negotiation, and the supplier immediately knows that you don't really understand the market and what you're talking about, and they can pretty easily take advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the number one thing just on this same topic is what the question was about is the ability to speak credibly. It's not just putting that data point in front of a supplier or putting that data point in front of your stakeholder who could probably care less about what that data point actually means unless you can explain why that is relevant, to them. But, you having that analysis behind that data point, this is what this data point actually means. And this is, how we can leverage this data point to identify a potential opportunity or even mitigate, some potential short and long-term, risk with how we're approaching this purchase.
Right. Now we've talked about it's really important to gather all the different intelligence and all the insights and perspectives that we come to bring these insights. And really, it's all about insights and then actions that come of those insights. I wonder if there's any success stories or examples, Embry, that you can share of folks that you're working with, of how they've been able to kind of triangulate all this information to be better informed, to drive better outcomes, for whatever constituted a good outcome in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share maybe a few, but one does come to mind. I was working with one particular client who was renegotiating. They had a contract renewal coming up for managed print services. And this was an agreement a national agreement that they have for about 12 to 15 corporate offices across the United States, and the supplier had contacted them and said, hey, we're going to be getting you're going to be getting a 2% increase, based off of inflation. And this isn't inflation. This is this is maybe about several years ago.
Yeah.
And my contact, the client, had gave me a call, says, hey, can you help me find the report? Do you have anything on printing services, managed print services? And at the time, they were looking at our report, and they saw they came down to our price driver section and the price forecast section, and zoomed into the input costs, and they said, hey, my supplier's giving me asking us to take on this 2% increase, but this report is saying the price of pulp and paper, which are the main cost drivers, is actually going down. It has been going down by about 3 or 4% for the past couple of years. And that brought up a question, why are they passing on this increase to us?
Yeah.
So what my client was actually able to do is look at that recent price data, as well as the price forecast data, where where those cost drivers were going, and it gave them the confidence to pick up the phone and speak credibly to that supplier, and not only looking at that price trend section, but understanding the reason for the price trend, the reason that was that price was going down. It essentially it's just that confidence. I think that boils back down to that question, the confidence to pick up the phone. And what my client was able to do is not only save a few $100,000, but actually get a rebate from a supplier from an unjustified increase in the past. And to take this even a step further, the power of looking at, price forecasting data, historical pricing data is not only relevant, when it comes time to looking at a renewal, but understanding and identifying these opportunities. Should we ever renegotiate a contract midstream so we don't assume those costs? If we can be a bit more proactive as a procurement department and procurement professional, instead of waiting until this contract comes up for renewal, now we have the time to go look, I like to say, look back to the future and see, hey, this is where prices are going. This is where this market is heading. Let's lock in this longer term, rate now, to not only save money, but to avoid this cost overall.
Yeah, even if it means renegotiating. So if a market is forecast, for example, a 5% year-over-year increase for the next 3 years, well, nobody really wants to go to a supplier and say, hey, I want to increase my prices, but maybe there's an opportunity there to try and lock in what you've got over a long-term deal. If your contract expires, in the next 12 to 24 months. So you may actually not be taking you may not be getting a cost savings, but you're extending the contract at the current price, and you're getting a cost avoidance essentially, because you're not going to be at the whim of the spot rate or where the market has gone when the contract comes up for renewal.
Absolutely. And I think you said something key. Nobody wants to do that.
Right.
And it boils back to that first question that we got, how do we use this information internally? How do we speak? And it's not just about speaking with our suppliers. It's about justifying these decisions internally, to our internal stakeholders. This is why I'm doing this. This is the benefit for our organization.
And what's always interesting when I look in, for example, price comparison data in market intelligence reports, and sometimes those price benchmarks, everyone has a different scope of work. And so it's very, very difficult to go and say, okay, I buy this, how do I compare that to a benchmark that is in a report? Because that number is part of a much bigger picture, which you're having to take into account based on the specifics of what you're buying. But where you see big gaps exist, it gives you the insight that maybe I need to go and dig a little bit deeper into this. I know earlier in my career, I was buying something, this is on the direct material side, but I was buying light bulbs in automotive. I could see that industry benchmarks are far higher than what I was, were far lower than what we were paying. When I had that information, I didn't necessarily know the reason behind that information, but then it sent me on a journey to investigate and to understand the things, like you said, input costs. Are we structuring contracts in the right way? Have we got higher costs to serve? Are we over specifying? Are we just, not being strong in a negotiating position, didn't have leverage for whatever reason, which meant that we couldn't really get competitive deals? You put all that together, and that then led me to be able to get to the benchmark, which was probably 30 to 40% lower than where we were. It's not something you can do immediately either. Big big gaps like that you can't take out in one negotiation, but you can do over a period of time, of 12, 24, 36 months, depending on what your strategy is, to kind of move things around like chess pieces every year, so you get to where you want to go, because you've got the insights that that back up the strategy that you're taking.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, if anybody has any other questions, please do be sure to send them in. I have one here that I'm going to share. It's from Juanita. Juanita asks, how accurate can data intelligence or forecasted prices be given current political tensions in different regions, specifically for certain raw materials like chemicals or precious metals? Ben, maybe I'll come to you to ask you kind of how you think about forecasted pricing, and with what degree of confidence should we place on those in a volatile market?
Generally not a great degree, Phil, to be completely honest. I am hard pressed to say that anybody could confidently forecast commodities, especially with any degree of reasonable accuracy. There's just so many macroeconomic factors that can affect a given commodity that they can change on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
That said, I think if you back up your methodology, if you have a reasonably robust either statistical method of forecasting, or you're able to bring in the expectations of some of those other macroeconomic factors into your forecast, then at least you have a base on which to stand when you're making said forecast. So
Right.
yeah, it can be crazy. Things can change so fast that it can be nigh impossible to confidently forecast, but certainly you can get some of the way there just by doing some of these other methods.
Let's see. I'm seeing if I can see any other questions here to pose to you for a moment. Let's have a look. Maybe there's some of these that. I'll ask this question. I've got an opinion, but I'm interested in your opinion too. From Anna, should procurement ask or expect suppliers to share the market intelligence they have gathered on their suppliers, so procurement can increase their understanding of the tier 2 costs? Have you heard of anything like that, Embry, with your clients?
I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest question is, should you trust that information? Is that, back to what the theme of this discussion, is getting information from your suppliers a credible source of information?
Yeah.
Are they giving you information that's going to benefit them and justify the cost increase that they're getting? I think you should always ask. The more information, the better. But, back to, what the theme of what Ben is saying, how credible is that information? What is the source of that information? So for something like that, I think it's still always important to have that third party, unbiased, resource to cross-reference and check what you are getting. Some suppliers are unique, where they may operate in a market where they are one of the few or one of the only ones, and that there are some one-off circumstances, but I don't think that should be. I think that should be the exception and not the rule.
Yeah. That's why. Go ahead, Ben.
And also how relevant the information is among or between clients. So are they interested in the current cost of cement, or are they interested in how much it costs to cut a 6-inch asphalt slab of curb? Right? Everybody has very different things that they're interested in and different levels of granularity in terms of what they're trying to get information about. So the relevance between them can be very disparate.
Yeah, and just something I was going to say, just in my experience, I've had a couple of one. If you're in an industry where there's very few, where basically you've got a lot of leverage, I have seen organizations require cost breakdowns, for example, more on the direct material side, to understand the cost of, the tier 2, even tier 3 costs, to try and understand, okay, what are all the input costs that go into that? Your ability to get that information depends on the leverage that you have in that marketplace. And as we talked about before, how do you trust that? What's interesting is I used to run a captive shared services team in India, and in automotive, we would have cost breakdowns for everything, or we'd be requiring cost breakdowns for everything across all of our suppliers. And the same suppliers would complete it in different ways. So they would say material cost is, $2.50 a kilo for something, and the next person had filled in the same form for another component, and they'd said it was $1.50 or $3.50. And so those numbers were pretty much, how do we fill the form out to get away with not giving out as much information as possible? That's you can have things like open book costing, which, where you've got collaboration that allows you to see more of what some of the input costs are with your providers and kind of ask that. But I would always go on a relational basis than trying to force it. And then it's all about how true are those. Now, the other thing to say is we've talked about input costs. Input costs to justify cost increases, and whether a cost increase is valid or not. But it's also interesting from a what about when prices go back down again? So you've taken a cost increase based on an input cost rising, the cost of paper or pulp, as we talked about before. Well, you need to start tracking that to make sure that when the market intelligence shows that has actually dissipated, because perhaps you've had that supply and demand imbalance that's come down, you've got the ability to take that back out if you've taken a cost increase. And what a lot of times happens is you take the increase, you kind of forget about it, the input costs go down again, and you've never gone back to try and recover the difference.
Absolutely.
Now, please do continue. I see lots of questions coming in. I just wanted to know, we're all about taking action here at Art of Procurement, and the things that we've talked about before I do go into any questions, any of the more questions that was received, that you would like to leave with members of the audience today about, how can we use market intelligence that we haven't talked about so far to really be prepared for these ever changing market conditions. And Embry, I'll ask you that first.
Yeah, I think number one is look at the full picture. Don't just look at what's in front of you. Don't just look at the end goal. See the full picture of not only, first set a goal. What is the goal? Understand the goals of your stakeholders, understand, the goals of your suppliers, how they operate, why they operate that way. Look at the full picture, because a lot of the times we will never know the right questions to ask unless we know what is, going on internally and externally. So look at the full picture and not just what's, right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to stick your neck out and make the call if something has changed. There's a lot of competitors in the market intelligence space, and a lot of them have similar answers, and a lot of them don't. But when you are going to make that sort of non-consensus call, be sure that you have the methodology to back that up. Don't be afraid to use definite language as opposed to trying to hedge your language. I worked in banking for 5 years, and so I sort of covering my own ass was ingrained into how I just spoke to people. And so I can be hard pressed to not hedge my language. It might do this, it could do this, it should do this based on this. But if you have that methodology, if it's defensible, if you can back it up, if you've used a quantitative method, then sort of being willing to stick your neck out can be a valuable skill. Also, if the world is changing fast enough, you may have to reassess the quantitative methods that you are using. So, for example, if inflation is 9% right now and the world has changed, so to speak, then should we be changing how we assess a buyer power score, for example? If everybody's prices are going up at 6%, say, and our previous score told us that that's just terrible for buyers, but if a rising sea raises all boats, then everybody paying 6% more is kind of all on equal footing.
Yeah,
so
you're not at a competitive disadvantage by paying it.
Precisely, exactly. So should that change how we are doing it? And it comes down to whether or not you want to stick to your guns, if 6% is kind of bad for everybody, or if you need to be willing to sort of change how you think about the world and change how you structure some of those numbers.
I did want to just come back to the question that we were asked a moment ago, because there was one of the thought that I had around asking for insights and getting insights from tier 2 or tier 3. You may not always get that information. One of the great things about market intelligence reports and the data that you have within third-party research, or the research that you can do on your own, triangulating from all the right sources, is that even if it's not 100% accurate, it gives you something in a story. And if you have confidence and trust in that data that you can put in front of a supplier to challenge them, it starts a conversation. Because they may come back and say, well, actually, I disagree with you. This shouldn't be 3%, it's actually 5%. Or this, is off in this way. And you've gone from not having any insight whatsoever to the cost structure and the input costs that your provider has. And this can apply both on the direct materials side and the indirect services side. You then go to, actually, it's more about arguing what the number is, whether it's a 3 or a 5, then we're not going to tell you anything. And that's really, always a good way to stimulate conversation around understanding cost with your suppliers. Now we have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ben. I will. I'm not going to jump the gun in with a question I have. If you wanted to just
my apologies.
Jump in with a little bit of thought on that.
Yeah, in an accounting class, I learned about this concept of accounting judgment. So when an accountant has a choice between using two different numbers, say depreciation at double discount or a straight line, that kind of thing, they can use what they call judgment to determine that, and that can involve all sorts of things like ethics entering into the question. And so it's just comes a little bit down to how to make decisions in situations where there are multiple alternatives and making decisions in the face of uncertainty. And I think it all comes back again to just having a methodology that you can at least rely back on and defend if needed.
I have a final call for any last questions that you may have if you're watching for Embry and Ben. I wanted to bring up a question here, which is from Manny. How does the role of market intelligence differ between procurement teams that are dedicated to categories versus teams that are generalists? Embry, do you see a difference in how companies that have different procurement structures approach their use of market intelligence?
Yes, I do. I feel like just from what I've seen, I feel like teams of generalists dive much deeper into market intelligence because they are faced and tasked with so many new things. And I think that's one of the things that drives them. They're not buying the same commodity, the same product over and over. And I personally work with a lot of folks who aren't necessarily new to procurement, but they oftentimes may be new to their organizations and new to the projects that hits their desk, that hits their emails. And that drives the needs to understand those projects, to become an expert, and not only become an expert, but become an expert much quickly. And when it comes to folks that are dedicated to those categories, is not that they don't need market intelligence, but they may have an understanding of that category. They may have an understanding of how to procure that, but their focus is more so what has changed. And how is change impacting what we've done in the past, and what we've decided, what was the plan, what was last year's plan. So it's a completely different approach. It's not, hey, you're teaching me something completely new, but does it make sense to shift our strategy overall? And that generalist is, hey, teach me everything. I'm constantly facing something new, and that's oftentimes what excites me. Right. what excites that person.
Yeah, it's like we and I've been a generalist as well, and you buy so many things for the first time that you've never thought about, like, how do I buy this? Childcare one week, marketing the next week, light bulbs the week after, you name it. It can be such a broad variety of things that we're buying. And so I can see how you're also looking like, what are the questions I would put in an RFP? Or an RFI, like, what do I need to know to actually make a decision on what my strategy should be, versus a specialist or one that has that knowledge. They know all those things, but as you said, they don't necessarily know what's changing or what is going to change. I'm a really big believer that that specialist knowledge of a category helps amplify the impact of the market intelligence that you can have, because you understand the nuance. If you're a generalist, you need more help understanding the nuances around a category and what you should do with it and what the market looks like. And so you've got to be really careful that you're absorbing as much information as you possibly can. So when you have that conversation with your stakeholder, first, they look at you as somebody who knows what they're talking about. And so they think of you as being a strategic partner rather than someone who's just running a process. And when you go to the supplier, they know that you can go and ask for the world because you read it in a market intelligence report, but you need to understand the nuances of where that came from so you can argue it, or you can have a debate or a discussion, or they'll know pretty easily that, they don't really understand it, so we'll just try and pull the wool over their eyes.
Yeah, and something else actually comes to mind when it comes to regionalization. You know, looking at a global strategy versus a regional strategy,
Mhm.
where you may be an expert and you may have bought this widget, bought this product, bought this service, domestically, but maybe your company, your organization is, becoming more centralized and taking a global strategy, and the players may be different. The regulatory market, may be completely different. Especially, you might look at something like healthcare services, which is completely different in the United States versus in the
Right.
UK, Canada, other places where there's these, particular nuances where that market intelligence and market information can bring a completely different perspective to something that you've been dedicated to managing for years.
And I think this is riffing off your answer earlier, Embry, a little bit, but somebody dedicated to a category is going to come to us with a very different level of comfort with the market. They might know a lot more about that market than we do currently. That's very often the case, and have very different questions. Sometimes they're coming to us just to see if we can mine that last little bit of gold that they haven't yet found, or
Mhm.
sometimes they're coming to us seeing if we can come up with a different way of sort of conceptualizing how the market works, even, or just different things to think about that they haven't already considered. Whereas a generalist is going to have often a much broader view of what they're looking for, which presents its own challenges. We have to go out and come up with ideas on RFP best
Yeah.
practices and KPIs and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of different things that they're asking about that the other people may already kind of have a handle on, but are still trying to find other information as well.
Well, I know, unfortunately, it's time to wrap up this session. It's been a really interesting and insightful conversation. Embry and Ben, I want to really thank you for joining us today, and just, helping us understand where we can go and get market insights from that help drive us, our category strategies, what we should look for, how we should disseminate it, and then triangulate that information into ultimately actions and outputs. It's been really valuable. Hopefully for the audience, it's been interesting for me for sure. So I appreciate your time today. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, an event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.